There is an event that happens, new creation breaks into the world, and people see Jesus. They witness Jesus alive. They hear about people they trust and love who witnessed Jesus alive. And because of that story, they had to join the movement that eventually would get the label Christianity. They did not join the Bible Club. They did not join and become Christians because of the Bible. The Bible emerges as a response to their response to Jesus.
Welcome to Theology Curator, a podcast hosted by Kurt Willems and available online at theologycurator.com. Each episode looks at a theological, formational, or cultural theme. We might dig into the life and letters of a radical Jewish teacher named Paul, converse about a pressing contemporary issue, reflect on the nature of following Jesus today, or even attempt to remedy doom and gloom preaching with a good old-fashioned dose of hope. This show is an invitation to build bridges between the first century world of the earliest Christ followers into the 21st century reality we now inhabit. The Jesus we excavate from the rubble of tradition might just surprise us all.
Welcome back to Theology Curator. This is the podcast arm of my online ministry presence, I suppose. My name is Kurt Willems. I'm your host. And of course, I have a newsletter that's also called Theology Curator. I have a website by the same name and invite you to explore any of those mediums that make sense for you. And I want to talk about something that we're going to step into today. That's going to be an ongoing series. Don't know how frequent, and I don't know how long necessarily. But what I do know is that you can expect a series that will kind of go on and on and on until I'm done letting it go on and on and on. Something that's going to be unique about this series that I'm exploring is I'm revamping my newsletter presence. I really love the newsletter. I've heard from so many people that are like, man, we've gotten through all of your content because, those kind of go out in order. And so if you start my sort of series of emails, you may start at the very beginning of some of the earlier emails that I wrote maybe a couple years ago and maybe aren't quite through the sequence yet, where other people are through the sequence and only get occasional ones when I write something brand new. And so what I've heard over the last year or so is, hey, we missed those emails. They are provocative, they're helpful, we really appreciate them, etc. And so I'm stepping back into that space as well. And what I'm doing is actually I will have a newsletter that coincides with each podcast episode in this series that's creatively called The Bible. And so The Bible Part 1 will have a newsletter that you can actually subscribe to, but you can also not just subscribe to it, there is a web-based version of it that you can also see on a website. And so I'm going to have that all sort of linked in the show notes and have a pathway for you to get to that. So hope that all makes sense. And what I want to do is just get into the content a little bit because that's really what I'm pumped about. Some of you are going to like the written form more because you like the clarity and the succinctness. And I think, go check that out after this. Some of you like the extemporaneous, the sort of random ruminations that come from these ideas out of my mouth maybe. And so this is much more of the laid back space where I'm just going to make some observations. So they're not the same thing. They're the same theme, the same idea, but I'm going to be talking about them in two different mediums. Hopefully that makes sense. So why a series on the Bible? Well, I never really thought I would do something like this. It never occurred to me to just talk about the Bible. But isn't that funny? Because this is a theology podcast. But I mean, in the sense that it was just like a focus. And what happened was there was a need that grew out of the life of our local church community. We wanted language for how we talk about the Bible. And so a series grew out of that. And I taught about the Bible for about 6 weeks. And it was really just something that was fun for me and well received in the community and beyond those who outside of our church are podcasters of our church or whatever. And so I thought to myself, well, what if I took the heartbeat of that content, but made it sort of in a different just made it more digestible, smaller chunks, etc. And so that's really what this series is. And so today we're starting the Bible. This is number 1, and I'm calling it A Movement, Not a Book. A movement, not a book. Now, when we talk about the Bible, we have to know that this thing is a confusing book, right? This is not an easy book. I grew up having this fantasy of Bible that was just like, it's easy to understand, you just have to pray or something. And what I've come to realize is that if we teach kids that the Bible is easy, we do a disservice to them. Now, should we teach them the easy things in the Bible? Oh yeah. Like, God is love. Jesus died to heal the world and wants to know you personally. We can know God's presence through the Spirit. Like, I want kids to know that stuff. We use kids' Bibles in my house. I mean, that stuff is foundational. But far be it from us to try and convince kids that the Bible is easy or tame or, well, just clear. It's not always clear. And one of the problems, of course, is that it came into being 2,000 years ago and beyond. 2,000 years ago just for the New Testament and the Christian scriptures, right? So yeah, we have this sense that there's a bit of a gap. And it's not just time, but it's culture. It's the gap within the gap, right? It's a culture gap. It's an experience gap. It's all kinds of things that are just different about the time when Jesus walked on the water. I was actually going to say walked on planet Earth, but yeah, it's just different. And it's even interesting now, like when we go to Jerusalem and we think of what Jesus would have walked on, well, the dirt's different now. There's more dirt. Jesus would have walked on dirt that's probably below the dirt that we walk on. There's all these layers to just thinking about the differences in the worlds of the first century and the 21st century. So this series is designed to build a bridge between those two worlds as we try to approach the Bible and honor the Bible, love the Bible, but keep it in its proper place. I'm going to talk about that a lot today. And so we're going to look at a lot of why questions, a lot of what questions, a lot of how questions, and we're not going to really just get stuck in information alone. What I hope is that we can also step into transformation, that we can also step into our own unique place in the story of God. So if that sounds interesting, if today's topic, A Movement, Not a Book, sounds interesting to you, I have a few thoughts on that, and I think it's time to go for it. Let's do it. Growing up in the church, my impression was that the Bible had to be true. Now, you're probably already saying, of course, it has to be true. And hear me out. I actually do believe that the Bible is true in a certain kind of way. And it's not a cop-out weird way, I assure you. I believe the Bible is very trustworthy, and I believe it's inspired by God and all of that stuff. But I had this idea that it had to be true in a different kind of way, that it was this sort of answer book for life. It was a way to defend my faith against everyone else who had different ideas or other denominations even, that I could defend myself with the Bible, that it was really a book for two purposes: making me grow spiritually, which I still believe it does that, and being a book to defend my ideas. I still think it can do that, sort of, but maybe not in the way that I used to. I've really grown to see the Bible as complex. And I have found myself in this process of growth for a little over a decade. And in that process, I have noticed something, that my love for the Bible has only increased over the years. Where some of the things I'm going to say are going to sound very like deconstructive and maybe outside of the box that some of us have grown up having for how we understand the Bible, I want you to know something. For me, what I'm doing here is not just deconstruction. I'm actually not in a space of a lot of deconstruction in my own spiritual journey right now. I'm in a reconstructive phase, if not a kind of leaning in phase. I have a really exciting life with God, full of highs and lows like anyone else. But I'm not in a place where I'm coming at this to blow up the thing. I hope that makes sense. But at the same time, I do think that we have a problem. We have put the wrong thing in the center. We have put the Bible in the center of the Christian faith. We have Bible churches. And if your church is called a Bible church, I'm not mocking you. I'm not making fun of that. I think, hey, there's something unique about a church that says we're going to lean into what the Bible teaches. I think that's good. I do. I utterly do. But I wonder if maybe all of those churches would ever consider a name change, a branding change, to saying something like, no, we're Jesus churches, right? And I know there's some churches that use that slogan. And I think that's kind of cool too. So my point is this, that we've made the center of the Christian faith a book, and then said it's the book that tells us about God. And of course, it's all about God, but functionally, it feels like the Bible often becomes our center. And the truth of the matter is that a person is the center. A person is the point. Jesus is the point. The Bible points to the point, but is never the point in and of itself. It functions like John the Baptizer. And I got to give a shout out to Brian Zond, because I know this is where I first heard the analogy, but think about John the Baptist or John the Baptizer. He would say something like, look over there. I'm not the guy. Jesus is the guy. He would point towards Jesus as he does in the Gospels. And, he would say things like, the one you want, the one you were looking for, so much greater than me. I'm not the point. I'm merely a signpost to the point, capital P, that we are all looking for. That's what the Bible does. It points to Jesus. It points to God. It points somewhere else. It never is meant to be the end point all on its own. It is not the point. It just doesn't do that. And when we make it the point, we get into all kinds of trouble. We're going to talk more about that. But that's a foundational conviction of this ongoing series, is that the Bible is never the point in and of itself. So that leads me to a question that I want to talk about for a couple of minutes. Why read the Bible in the first place? Here's the short answer to all of it. Something happened. That's really the answer that I'm going to give throughout this series. Why the Bible? Something happened. Why the Bible? Something happened. Why the Bible? Yeah, you get the point. Our faith has never been a book-based thing at all. If we look back to the first century and we look at how the early church navigated its own identity, we're going to see that it was not a book-based faith at all. It had scriptures, of course, and we'll talk more about that. But at the end of the day, something happened, and that was what propelled them into a movement, not a book study. And we're going to talk about why. But here's what we need to notice, is that the thing that happened is about Jesus. It is Jesus that is the center. And I want to introduce some kind of terminology, I think, that will hopefully give us common language as we move forward. So I'm going to use this phrase, the Jesus event. I'm sure it's been used other places in other ways, but the Jesus event is what happened in the first century that was the thing that caused people to say, I think I want to follow Jesus. I think I want to join a Christian community. I think I'm going to do whatever it takes, even die for this belief. And so the Jesus event, maybe some of the things that summarize the Jesus event, in my mind at least, the God of Israel heard the cry of humanity. And because this God heard the cry of humanity, this God chose to forsake privilege and became, for us, incarnated as the Son of God. And this Jesus shows us how to live fully human and is a renewal teacher for the Jewish people. He's not anti-Jewish. He's a renewal teacher. He wants to see new things happen within his own community, things that will eventually lead to opening the doors to non-Jewish folks. Through his teachings, of course, his death for his enemies, his defeat of the evil powers, even sin and death through the cross, and his resurrection, his appearances, his ascension, his enthronement, all of this evidencing that he, in fact, is the world's true Lord, gave birth to a movement. This movement, of course, believed that Jesus had risen in an incorruptible physical body and had appeared to hundreds of followers before returning to the heavenly sphere of reality. And that movement would be propelled forward, not just because of eyewitness testimony, but because of the Holy Spirit who came and empowered all of these early movement people in wisdom, boldness, grace, and truth, because Jesus' Spirit would be this ongoing presence with all of those early followers in this movement. And of course, this Jesus event has in view a future reality, a future Jesus event where Jesus will return to judge, heal, purge, resurrect, and bring heaven to bear on earth in the ultimate act of renewal and new creation for eternity. And so the Jesus event, if we were to get even more concise, is the life, death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus with the expectation of a future return. And so that's what I'm talking about. And that's what I believe is the compelling thing that happened that led to this movement that maybe we could call the Jesus movement. And so hopefully we're kind of getting it. I mean, to be even more blunt, no resurrection of Jesus, no movement. No movement, no Bible. And that's what's so critical here that we understand. Without the resurrection and event, something that happened, there is no movement, which would eventually produce documents that would eventually produce, compile, bring together a Bible. A movement comes first, a Bible comes second. And so there are 300 years that we're going to look at that I think are worth exploring and wrestling with, because the Jesus event seems to be, in the earliest church environments, why people were Christians. They weren't Christians because they stumbled across the Bible one day and someone told them about a pamphlet that interpreted that Bible for them. I mean, there were not compiled Bibles just laying around anywhere. You know, some communities might have access to some documents from the New Testament as time went on. Some might have, one of Paul's letters. One would have Revelation and a gospel. This other one would have Luke and Peter's letters. There would be all kinds of ways we could probably guess, but a compiled New Testament does not show up until the 4th century as a normative possibility for followers of Jesus to engage with. And so when we think about the Bible, we need to understand we've got to place it within this bigger picture. There is an event that happens, new creation breaks into the world, and people see Jesus. They witness Jesus alive. They hear about people they trust and love who witnessed Jesus alive. And because of that story, because of that witness, because they saw something, they experienced something, they felt something, they had to join the movement that eventually would get the label Christianity. They did not join the Bible Club. They did not join and become Christians because of the Bible. The Bible emerges as a response to their response to Jesus. It is all about the Jesus event, and it is all about Jesus himself at the center with the Father and the Spirit. So why the Bible? Why read it? Why do we have it? What is it there for? Simple answer. Something happened. The Bible is the product of the movement. It is not the center of the movement. Of course, I need to unpack this, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to continue this conversation over a long series. These are going to be usually, I think, shorter like this, about 20 minutes or so. And hopefully, we will build a foundation through which we can then sort of build on top of, like, okay, so how do we actually read this Bible now that we understand the purpose and the kind of emergence of where the Bible even comes from in the first place? The Bible is a product of the event. Something happened and it changed the world. Well, friends, that's all we've got for today. And I hope you'll check out the newsletter version of this, because I think, again, having the written content sometimes is just nice. And so all you got to do is go to theologycurator.com/newsletter. That's theologycurator.com/newsletter. And you'll be able to find it. I have it set up to redirect right to the newsletter site. And you can find all kinds of past writings of mine and sign up for ongoing updates about these sorts of things. And it would be awesome to have you along the way with me. So hope you're having a great day. Hope you are enjoying part 1 of this series, and I will look forward to sharing more and more of this series with you in the coming days and weeks and months ahead. Have a great rest of your day and continue seeking the way of Jesus and partnering with others so that you can live lives together in intelligent and humanizing ways.
Thanks for listening to Theology Curator. For more resources from Kurt Willems, check out theologycurator.com/newsletter to sign up for our email update list. For new listeners of the podcast, we hope you will subscribe via iTunes, Google, or your podcast manager of choice. If you like what you hear, please leave the show a review. For regular listeners, consider supporting Kurt's online ministry at patreon.com/Kurt Willems. Lastly, please don't let this conversation end when the episode is over. We hope you feel empowered in regular life to explore theology and faith in intelligent and humanizing ways.